You know, a lot of people have told me that Terrence Malick, they're not quite sure of what kind of a director he is, actor's director, cerebral director, whatever. All I can say is my experience. And my experience was that he trusted me to bring what he hired me to bring. And then he trusted me even more to bring things that I didn't even know I had in me.
I had gotten the script about 3 months ago. Penny Allen had given me the script to read, and she told me that they were looking, they couldn't find the part of the captain. So I read it. It was really about this thick. I was going, geez, you know, what the hell am I going to get through this thing? And as soon as I read it, I thought, here's a good script. It's huge. A lot of logistics trying to do this right, you know. To me, what came across was how thankless the part of the captain felt, you know. I mean, his men weren't behind him. They didn't really believe in him, and until something in their process happens that turns these men around. So I felt it was a pretty thankless role. You're gonna get beat up, you're gonna get fired, and then you're gonna get sent home. And so I thought, where's the joy in that, you know? So ultimately, there were enough heads who prevailed to convince me that this is an opportunity not to pass up, you know.
I originally auditioned for the part of Private Doll, which is the one that I played, and auditioned a bunch of times.
I was doing a Sam Shepard play at the time, and then Sam Shepard did Days of Heaven with Terry. And from what I gather from Terry, Sam showed him a tape of the play, but I needed to be in this film, even if I was carrying ammunition to Nick Nolte. I had to be in the films.
I actually flew down to Austin, Texas to meet Terry when I heard that they were casting for the film, because Terry didn't know who the hell I was, and I was determined that he would know who I was. And it resulted in the audition. I remember the audition process being very meticulous, very slow. Terry's very quiet, and very thoughtful. And you really got the feeling like you were invited into the inner world of a poet.
There were 5 pilots they wanted to sign me for, and I was going to test 5 pilots, and I kept coming back to the Thin Red Line. And they were saying, well, look, we'll talk to Diane Crittenden and then radio down to in Australia, because Terry's, you know, looking at locations. And so, is he going to get any part in the movie? That was it. It was a fair question. And then Terry's response through Diane was, Jim needs to take the work he can get at hand. And then it went on. I mean, this was like 12 weeks. And then one day, he calls me at home, and he says, hey, Jim, this is Terry. He says, I was wondering if you, I would, and I'll never forget, he says, I'd like you to play Wit. And he says, well, okay, Jim, well, welcome aboard, and I feel like I'm getting on a train I can't get off. And I said, don't worry, I'll be there. And so I knew before my agents even knew. I had to call them and tell them.
The whole prep for the film, it was literally, we were bombarded with packets, information of the film, the time, the dialect, the information of where we're gonna shoot, which was in Cairns, Port Douglas and Cairns, which was like 2.5 hours outside of Sydney, Australia. So, you know, for me, New Yorker, it's a 6-hour flight to LA, flight to Sydney, flight to Cairns, then a 2-hour drive to Port Douglas. And it was just the scope where the whole town literally was rented out for our production. It was like literally like, I think 400 or 500 people there at any given time, you know, with the extras and just the boot camp training, and it was it was, you know, probably the equivalent of doing like a modern day Ben-Hur, you know.
We had a boot camp, and it was perfect because it definitely got us prepared to be brothers. Not to mention it was physical, and we were dirty and no shower and a week in the bush and digging our own trenches and staying up half the night on lookout. I mean, it was the real deal. But you know, when you're sleeping eight guys in a tent with each other and it was freezing at night and you had to cuddle up, you become pretty close.
And I remember trying to, in the middle of the night, not knowing my head from my feet, and it was so cold that night. Here we are in the tropics, but it was so cold, and it was pouring down rain, like showers. We were in the rainforest, and it just comes down in sheets. And I was holding Adrian Brody, and I thought it was my wife. And you could hear this, Jim, I'm not your wife. And sorry, you know, I think I probably kissed his ear or something. Maybe I even bit it, I don't know.
I knew Adrian from high school. I knew Dash from New York. So we have camaraderie that way. Then they also put on we'd play basketball at nighttime. So every night we'd play basketball for like 2 or 3 hours. So there was a camaraderie there, and also from the boot camp. And, you know, surprisingly, it was, you know, for 23, 24-year-old testosterone-filled boys, we surprisingly got along.
I think it was important to capture a certain mentality of the times, you know, and I don't know if all of us went, and that's a lot to do with the writing and a lot to do with Terry's sensibility and how he set us up. And but I knew that it was important that we were guys who were from the 40s.
In preparation for this role, more than anything, I just imagined what it would be like to not know where you're going and be shot at. And it was kind of as hard or as easy as that.
They gave us a list of books to read in preparation for filming, and so yeah, we you know, and also movies. You know, we watched, you know, From Here to Eternity, and
gave me some Copeland to listen to. It was very inspiring, sort of beautiful, very American, you know, in a strange way. This is the kind of director Terry is.
Also the technical aspect, the training of learning our weapons, sleeping with our weapons, being, you know, looking out for each other, being in the trench on lookout patrol at night, making sure you're staying awake or your partner is.
Every night we'd go running, and every day we'd go running, and I would always run in the morning, and then I would go running again at night, because Terry kept saying, "Oh, Jim, you better, you know, have your legs behind you. I really, really need you to have your legs, be strong, because there's a lot of hills around there."
We got hills all the time. Terry was fond of having me and Ben Chaplin chase the crane up these hills, and you know, you're constantly falling and your weapons bumping into you, whatever. I have this great picture of me, which was like how you would come home every night with like 4 different wrapped ice bags and one on my head, and I'm just like looking like, this is my life, you know. I guess he thought that I was physically up to matching, because you have to match your distance in these sweeping shots, and you cannot let up. So you have to stay like 2 feet from the lens, otherwise focus goes out of. And so I became really close to the Aquila crane, like, because I had to stay in its proximity.
you know, you're carrying M1s, real M1s, and you know, I think at the time 9.5 pounds or 9 pounds, 4 ounces or something like that. Some of them weighed like 15 pounds, and you have to run up a hill like 40 times. That's just one day. Because of the grass, you had no idea where your foot was going to be. There was no footing because it could have been a hole. And, you had grass up to your chest. And then on top of that, you had to dodge like the fake bodies, or you didn't know where they would put like an explosive. So you had to dodge explosives and stuff like that. So it was very difficult to see.
My uniform on this movie was never washed. So every morning, you'd wake up at 4:30. It'd be freezing out. You'd drive an hour up to set, get into your trailer, and put on this tank top that smelled like a rotten ham. And they disinfected it, but they couldn't, for continuity reasons, wash it. It weighed about 20 pounds, just the tank top, and it was cold out in this cold, wet, damp, rotten ham smelling thing. And then you put the other one on, and you're like, and then you went and you put the dirt all over your face, and then it turned into being 120 degrees out, and you sweated all day in this thing, and it just it was literally like a whole nother weapon. Like you're wearing 40 pounds of stank, greasy ham.
The way Terry would communicate with the actors, everyone assimilated the information differently than others. So it was, we would imitate some of the direction, not so much just more spoofing the manner it was delivered. There was one part where there was literally a 45-second crane shot, and it was like over 2 days. And the most you can do was one setup per day, because you had to, all the explosives had to be set up, and it was like 500 guys, and the camera would swoop down, swoop down, swoop down, swoop down, and then zoom in on a character crying. So Terry goes, "Okay, Kirk, all right, that's gonna be you. Go ahead and start crying." I'm cracking jokes with playing chess with Woody Harrelson, and it's just like, "All right, just start crying. Go ahead, go." It's for some people, it was different. You have to sort of like, focus right away, because on any given day, at any given hour, you didn't know what you were going to shoot. It was very spontaneous, so the lighting suited this moment, this scene, so that's what we were going to shoot at this moment. So, you had to be on your toes.
One thing that he told me in the beginning, where I couldn't really understand until much later, was I would tell him we need rehearsal. We got to rehearse. It's a bit of a running joke, and he said, "Oh yes, your whole life has prepared you for this moment." And I'm going, "All right, what does he mean by this? What does he mean by this?" I soon found out that how much my own experience in life paralleled a similarity to, without the insanity of obviously the captain's responsibility, but there was a bit of a similarity in terms of coming out from nowhere, being a reservist, being almost on the fringes of, so suddenly you're called upon to be a leader of men.
There was a big scene with a big death scene, and it's like 15 pages long. And so everyone was like, "Oh my God, who's the actor that's gonna play that?" And so then Terry and Grant came up to me and they were like, "So what about you playing this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd rather play that scene." Because when you read it, it's just like it's a beautiful scene. And one of Terry's notes in the beginning was, "Now, Kirk, you're on a ship, and the beach is right there, and you're calling out into the abyss, and that's what your motivation is." So it was like, gotcha, understand. But the funny thing is about that is that I did understand. You know what I mean? His directing is very poetic. Very just sort of like catching for, like fairies and butterflies, so to speak.
I mean, for me personally, it was tough because you got to, you come in with a bit of an ego that you kind of have some idea of what to do and how to play. And then when you're told to, like, "Could you look to your left? That's it, now turn around. turn to your right, look up there, listen to the distant bird. You know, so you have these hands-on kind of direction. You get kind of, it feels a little humbling, but ultimately you realize that you're part of a bigger vision, you know, and you just got to surrender yourself to it, you know.
It was like a collage. It was, you get in that mode, and from the beginning of it, Terry would write, Jim, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like this, and he'd give me a paragraph, and I would go and learn it, and then it wasn't working for me, you know, and then it was like this paragraph, that paragraph, and then this is what it is. It's a little that, a little this, and pretty soon I felt like Terry wasn't my director, he was my teacher.
They're coming.
Terry had a lot of dialogue scenes and that he cut. And then he had scenes that he wrote the night before and would give it to you. So you kind of didn't know what you might not have known what his intention was for the day. And sometimes he would say, don't say anything now. But I think people try to put him in this category of, oh, you know, it's Terry style. He likes everything to just be a reaction, and that's not true. He loves to write, and he loves to hear the dialogue.
I was, you know, more of a spectator than anything, just watching, coming in and seeing this creation. The end of the film, you know, I could feel the miles and miles of footage that were behind this cast and crew. It was visceral, you know. John Toll shot the film from dawn to dusk, nonstop, whether it was cloudy or sunny. And I asked Terry halfway through the day, you know, most directors will wait for the sun, will spend half the day waiting for the sun, or the cloud, or whatever it is that you need, however you establish in the film. You're shooting magic hour, pure hard sunlight, and clouds, overcast. What are you doing? And Terry said, well, you see, this way, I've got the film, I've got the scene 3 ways. I've got it at magic hour, full sun, or overcast. And I could cut the movie together, and I could cut as all overcast, all sunny, or all magic hour. And that way I could put your scene anywhere I want in the film. And I was like, oh my God, you, as improvisatory as you are, as deviant from the script as you've gone, you still keeping in mind the mechanics of what you're building.
Towards the end of the movie, when Terry was figuring out who he was going to take to Guadalcanal, it was kind of like a pick me, choose me vibe. And I was really grateful to be taken there. But it was also like, okay, we're done with the hardest part. Let's go and, you know, have a little more fun and breathe. And not, since we didn't have such a big crew and we didn't have to take care of so many people, it was a little more, you know, fun and guerrilla shoot what we shoot.
I arrived at night. I was terribly jet lagged in the Guadalcanal or Solomon Islands or wherever the hell we were. I didn't really quite know. It was sort of a dreamlike atmosphere. And it seems like all the American actors had gone native. And a lot of them were wearing native outfits. And it really reminded me of Apocalypse Now, the way that characters had just gone completely off the beaten path and were enraptured enrolled in their own roles, and what they were bringing to screen was spilling over into their daily lives. And you could tell right away as an actor that these people were entrenched in the characters they were playing and the time they were playing it in, and that Terry had the actors completely in his grasp. They had all of their trust was thrown into Terry. They trusted him implicitly, and they were free to be free. And that's a great feeling, you know, as an actor. It's like, oh, I can take off my backpack and my luggage and my baggage and take off my clothes and be free.
After a certain point, there was nothing on the schedule that said, you're going to do this today. You just would do stuff.
That don't matter.
And there was this beautiful girl, this beautiful eyes, and you know, Terry would catch everything. I'd look over her, and
If she streams, you want, she will sleep.
she's beautiful. And he's like, Jim, go over and just talk to her. Ask her how the weather is. And so I just started talking, and that's in the movie.
One of the best times I had in Guadalcanal was Adrian Brody and I found they were doing a battle of the bands, and it was like reggae bands or whatever in the Solomon Islands. And Adrian Brody and I went, and he had his little, he makes hip hop beats and I make hip hop beats. So he had his little beat making machine, and we entered Battle of the Bands and performed in front of like 1,000 Melanesians in the middle of Guadalcanal, randomly, hip hop. It was amazing. I was hired to shoot a war film. Now I do not think it's a war film. I think it's an amazing poem about the beauty of life.
It relaxes me to know that it's not all dependent on who is in the movie. It's the story, the filmmaker is the thing for me. And somebody with a big vision, it's obvious, you know. You wanna, it'll challenge you, it'll elevate your game, it'll make you bust out from bad habits that you're used to, you know, and change, you know, and he wanted your input, he welcomed your thoughts. He didn't make you feel like you weren't a part of it. You wouldn't have been there if he didn't see something in you, you know. Life before Terry Malick and life after Terry Malick.
I think that in The Thin Red Line, we go beyond Americanism or American patriotism and get down into brotherhood and the alliances we make with each other and how you're fighting for the lives of your friends, much more so than the lives of yourself or of an ideal, of an American ideal.
Look out through my eyes. Look out at the things you made.
My favorite section of The Thin Red Line is the section that I think Leslie was the only one who worked on it. It's about a 10 or a 15-minute section, and I think it starts when they come back from the battle, the R&R. I think they're on the trucks coming back, and they start hanging out at the camp, and they're fighting amongst each other, and Ben Chaplin goes on a walk.
War don't ennoble men. Turns them into dogs.
And it's got voiceover in it, and music.
Poisons the soul.
The reason it's my favorite part of the movie is it's the movie that most says only Terry could have made this movie. It's so introspective, and having known Terry for so many years, it's so much him. Where I would say, what you're watching here is Terry. This is Terry's thoughts. This is his feelings about what's going on, about what the story is, what the meaning of the movie is. It's the most representative of him. It's where he touched the movie the strongest.
I remember him saying that he was wondering why he was doing this movie, because he doesn't like war. He's not an action director. Battle scenes, you know, he said, I don't know how to direct a battle scene. You know, what am I doing? And I mean, you can see what he turned the movie into, and it's very much, all of the movies, very much Terry, I think. But I think this scene, this sequence in the movie where they're on their rest was time for reflection, and, you know, a chance for him to get out of that that war, you know, experience.
You get something twisted out of your insides by all this blood, filth, and noise.
Having to direct like a huge army running up the hill with all these cameras and, you know, tanks and just walkies, and he was, you know, he just kind of felt like that wasn't directing. In fact, he sort of, I think at one point he said it'd be great to just get like Rennie Harlan or some other director to like just direct those parts of it so he can actually spend some time directing the actors. Just because the logistics, I think, was just so overwhelming, and I don't think that was his favorite part.
The script was a really true to the novel. It was very much about story and characters and the backstory and strategy for these battles, and it was so dense, and I don't think he was that interested in it. And that's what I was focused on, because I had to cut all this stuff. It was coming in, I had to cut it. But I didn't think he was really that interested. He knew something new would evolve in post. So what I was worried about, or not worried, but just, you know, stuff that I wanted to talk about with him, he really knew, he knew it wasn't important. And so what he did want to talk about with me was sort of the feeling of music. He was really interested in the second unit shooting in the Solomon Islands. That was the only time I ever saw him at Daly's, when we got that film in with the Melanesians. And so he was really shooting another movie at the same time. When we had the cut together, he didn't want to see it, did he?
Oh, no.
You didn't want
We
to see
forced
it?
him to watch the first cut of the movie, which
Yeah.
was 5 hours. And we sat him down. And I said to him, I said, I'm not going to work anymore. I'm stopping until you sit and watch everything. So he did. We sat one day and we watched the 5-hour cut. I think he only watched the movie once from beginning to end. That was the first cut. I don't think he ever watched it again from beginning to end. I think his vision is all about what it's going to feel like when it's finished and what it feels like during the process. And he's sort of working towards getting to a point where he feels like it's working. And then it's a matter of really shaping it. It's like sculpture for him. I mean, it's the only way I could really describe it. The first element is what he shoots, and then you start to cut it together, and then you start to add music, and you start to add voiceover and sound effects, and each of those elements then changes the way the scene will be cut together, and will change the rhythm of it, and you discover new rhythms, and that's why it takes so long to do his films. Plus, he spends a lot of time really just thinking about what it is that he's trying to get to. And he doesn't always know himself until he gets further along in the process, I'd say, and he starts to see it.
Love.
It's all very impressionistic. He doesn't go into a scene with specific intentions.
Where does it come from?
As far as structure of the scene, I think his intentions are all about
Who lit this flame in us?
meanings in the scene and meanings of dialogue and different ways of approaching it. And
No war can put it out, conquer it. I was a prisoner. You set me free.
At first, we were just chipping away at it. You know, it was, instead of sort of building it up with new elements, music, and voiceover, it was just chipping away at, you know, the dialogue, making it shorter, making it more silent. His main objective was to lose the dialogue and create voiceover pads. So he would agree to go into the screening room with one reel at a time, silent. So we would conform a reel, take it in the screening room. He would bring music, just a CD of some, I think he was listening to Green Day at the time. And play the music and watch the reel silent. And if there was any dialogue that he didn't care that he wasn't understanding, we'd take it out. If he missed understanding something, okay, we'd keep that in. So it was, really all about just creating these long sections where we could put voiceover.
Your death that captures all. You too are the source of all that's going to be born.
I think during post-production, it was an adjustment to not be watching the film as a whole. And when we did get to watch the film, he didn't watch with us, and he would be very interested in our feelings about it, but he wouldn't see it. And so I just don't think he was capable of seeing the movie as a whole during the process while he was really still in it. So I think that was a big adjustment.
I think the stories are more of an emotional level with Terry, and I think the process is completely different because there isn't a goal, really. There's an exploration that happens when you work with him where it isn't like, you don't really know what the scene is about, and he doesn't really know what the scene is about until he sort of plays around with it and finds out what it's about. It's forever changing. He has a script, but the script is not necessarily what he shoots. Once he gets on the set, he just, whatever inspires him is what he goes with. And then the way that you edit has got to be completely reinvented because you don't have any kind of traditional coverage of everything. The necessity of how he shoots creates not restrictions, but ways that, make it a different work style. And also the lack of necessity to actually keep it short and tight in the beginning, and usually towards the end also gives you certain kinds of freedoms. The strange thing with Terrence is you have to be sort of the conservative force because he's so wild and radical. It's a very mysterious process. It's hard to explain. When I came on the Thin Red Line, there was already, I think, an assembly, and I came in because Terry wanted to bring me in to cut the big scene where Nick Nolte says, we're going to take this mountain, I don't care, how many people die. And it starts, I think, with a buried face of a Japanese soldier, and it goes all the way to them taking the village, and I think the now famous voiceover, this great evil, where does it come from? So Terry just brought me in, and he said, look, I don't want to tell you a lot about this, but I want somebody with a whole different approach to come in and just take this. And he didn't show me a cut of that, he just gave me piles of footage. I don't know how much it was, but hours and hours and hours. And I think he just gave me some guidelines. I was starting to learn his visual language and what he likes and what he doesn't like. At that point, he didn't like any long lenses. Everything had to have a foreground element, and a middle ground, and a background. He liked a lot of depth. And I just started putting it together, and I think he'd peek his head in and look at some stuff, and but it was more about, I think the analogy at the time was about a river, that this thing is just sort of water flowing. And at time, the river widens and, the water flows faster, and then it can kind of like dam up. And it just sort of like, this analogy of the water was very important to him. And that's how he kind of discusses things with you. He's not really precious about anything. He's just constantly exploring, and there's a playfulness that I think you don't find with any other director. I think very early on, I don't know if he was conscious of it, but that was the wit character and the innocence, or whatever you want to call it, Christ-like figure, was the most fascinating part of the story to him. I think it was the soul and the spirit of the thing, and not even that, more the nature and the native people of, I think it was the Solomon Islands, was what really spoke to him.
I remember when I think I started to read Thin Red Line, and the The Whit character was not the main character. In the original script, Adrian Brody's character was the main character.
I heard people talk about immortality.
He just had this really strong connection with that character and Jim Caviezel. I mean, you could see new footage coming in with Jim, and it was powerful. You could tell it was just there was something much more focused and powerful.
I mean, the first cut of the movie was about Whit. I mean, he shifted everything while he was shooting.
He really found Whit's voice during production and then elaborated on it later. We shot the scene, the flashback with his mother much later in the process. He wrote that much later.
He doesn't really make decisions in any kind of like commercial way. It's not like we can't, we need to have this actor in and we have to do that. It's just whatever fascinates him, he goes with. I mean, it's such a rare experience on a large film to work in a way where you can, spend all your time on some sort of unknown native, because that's what's fascinating.
Baby's tired.
Finding footage in a Terry film when you need to cut away to something is, first of all, the projects are usually organized by some sort of nature shots and a whole bunch of breakdowns of other, I think we call them like scene 500s that are all kind of, could be used anywhere. And then Terry is very, Terry's very passionate about those sort of cutaways wherever they are, to the sky, to a bird, to water, and is incredibly selective of what he likes and what he doesn't like. And he creates assemblies, of the things that he does like. And a lot of times when you're cutting with him, he will say, well, why don't you just try that, the water and the rock over there, that, try that shot. There's always plenty of additional sort of nature photography that can work, And I think he's always grabbing little bits whenever he sees something interesting. And because of the nature of his narratives, you can really use anything anywhere. You don't need, the light doesn't need to match, it can be anything. There is a laboratory kind of like feeling to the editing room that's always really exciting.
There aren't really a lot of layers of sound in the picture, but there are very specific sounds. And the result of that is that you're very aware, that you're hearing specific sounds that he really cares about having. It's really the sounds of nature that he really cares about, because what it does is it brings you into the reality of the situation, and at the same time it's very universal. There's a real universal quality to it. And that's very important to him, and it's very important to the sound of any film he makes, and it was very evident in Thin Red Line also.
I think the sound and the music everything is sort of approached together. It's not like a separate element. It's not like we don't, work on picture and then sound and then voiceover. The voiceover does tend to come in a little bit later.
How did Steele enter the world?
The process of voiceover with Terry is interesting because it doesn't really start right away. I mean, I think he writes voiceover all along, and he's got little cards that he constantly sort of fills with ideas.
What seed, what root did it grow from?
But that's just like an ongoing process, and a lot of times it's kind of like you cut things together, but the voiceover doesn't really go in until a little bit later, and then you place it and you take it out. It's some form of scaffolding that sometimes gets removed, sometimes gets put back in, and it's a constant, it's never really there fully, and you never really know what you're going to end up with.
There was just a lot of thinking about who would have a voice in the movie. Would there be a neutral voice, like a narrator? Would everybody have a voice, and so there was just experimented a lot with that.
What's this war in the heart of nature? Why does nature vie with itself?
Most of the voices you hear are from characters you're seeing at that time. But then there's a neutral voice that's peppered throughout the movie. Opens the movie and closes the movie. And I don't think we're ever meant to know who he is.
Is there an avenging power in nature? Not one power, but two?
And the voiceover that Terry had written was incredibly personal and spiritual and emotional, and that was really, I felt, the essence of the movie. That was more the script in the end than the real script was.
Who's killing us? Robbing us of life and light. Mocking us with the sight of what we might have known.
Terry's movies connect to people's subconscious thoughts without them even realizing it. I think his movies connect in a real visceral way.
I think what makes the Japanese bivouac so interesting to me also is the mix and taking the sound, many of the sound effects out, and just really featuring the music. There was something really overwhelming about that.
The beam idea on Thin Red Line came a little bit later in the picture when we were looking for something to capture sort of like the fear of war, and he remembered a guy from, I think, from like Venice Beach from like the 70s, and tracked him down. And that was actually fascinating. That worked incredibly well, because I think that just the traditional compositions weren't working for him. He felt like another element was needed. And we brought, oh God, I wish I remember her name. We brought him down, and I remember they set him up in a huge park. It was really hard to figure out where to set him up because he has a huge I-beam connected to, with a whole bunch of pickups on it and Marshall amps and all that, but you need an incredibly large space for it to resonate in. And Terry's got an incredible ear, you know. He really will hear if something is off or a little bit different or it doesn't sound exactly the same. I think they set him up in a huge parking structure on the Fox lot, and that didn't really work. And so at some point they just found, I think, the biggest stage they have, and they brought the beam and they put a big Persian rug and like a huge wall of amps. It looked like a Led Zeppelin concert, and they recorded it over there. And I remember visiting and getting the old like sort of aviation grade, like, you know, earplugs, so you won't, you know, your ears won't bleed. And this guy just playing away and the feedback and all that. Once we got that, it was incorporated into the music, into Hans Zimmer's music, and it just became an element of it. And but Terry is incredibly specific about music, and he's got an incredible understanding, which I think could be very intimidating for composers, because I think music is the part that's usually the most mysterious to directors, and so they're easiest on the composers in a way, because they don't speak the language of music, and they're not necessarily a musician. And I think, I don't know Terry's musical history, but he seems like, you know, he really knows what he's talking about. So I think it creates more of a dialogue with musicians. It's a little bit, could be intimidating, but it's a little bit more like he would work with an editor. I mean, I think most directors understand picture and sound, so they have a voice, they have a language they can speak to with editors and cinematographers, and with musicians, it's always a little bit, ooh, you know, the composer. And with Terry, it's not like that at all. So it's much more of a, you know, he gets his hands dirty in that respect and really, you know, likes to get involved in it.
So the whole editing process took about a year and a half?
Yeah, a year and a half to cut. We had a lot of footage. Something over 1 million feet. I never knew exactly how much. If there's 6,000 feet is an hour, so 6,000 divided into 1 million is that many hours. So we had a lot of hours. I tell this to everyone who goes to work on Terry's movies, that nothing will ever be this hard again. And any movie they cut after this will always seem easy.
There were so many different characters in the movie, and focus was on different people throughout the film, so it was hard to, while I was cutting, to understand how they would all be integrated together. That was hard for me to understand. But when the movie was done, I felt like they were all really one person. Every character was really just part of one big, you know, whole, and it really worked for me.
You have to be completely egoless to approach Terry's editing process. I mean, there's usually a lot of people editing. There's usually people that he finds that, you know, he thinks are talented, you know, and you don't really know without any kind of traditional film background. It could be, you know, some biologist that he met somewhere that he feels is, you know, interesting or has an interesting aspect, and you have to suddenly be handed some sort of assembly from this guy you don't even know. You have to, if you have any sort of ego, the experience is incredibly painful, and your ego is definitely tested and challenged every day. And it works. I've never had any kind of problem on any of his films. It's always, I think you just accept that you're part of this collective.
It's, it just teaches you that there are no rules about editing, and you should be willing to try all kinds of things that maybe you wouldn't have tried if you hadn't gone through that previous experience. And in that way, it's such a unique, mind-changing way. It really alters the way you look at film editing and filmmaking, and in a great way, in an incredibly expressionistic and impressionistic way of dealing with making movies.
I don't even know how I met Terry, but somehow I met Terry. Oh yes, through a mutual friend. And we instantly started chatting, and we instantly got on like a house on fire, and it instantly ended up with Terry moving into my studio for a year and a half before he even started on Thin Red Line. So he was just this floating soul here, you know, but it was really nice because he could talk about the things he were very passionate about, like paintings and film, and there's always Terry to talk to. And I think he liked this environment because in a peculiar way, we, you know, it was a bunch of musicians, like a commune of musicians, always making music, and I think he loves music tremendously. And then slowly sort of Thin Red Line sort of rippled into my life. Firstly as I think it was a 198-page script, which I dutifully read. And then I said to Terry, you know, I tell you what, I'll never mention the 198-page script again. We'll just talk about the feeling, you know, of this film and where you want to go. So we actually never talked about the script again. And we spent an inordinate amount of time just talking about colors. I mean, you know, John Toll came in, and you know, we started talking about, you know, music and colors and all these sort of things. So most of the time we were having incredibly unpractical, unpragmatic, philosophical conversations about films, you know, sort of heading at this you know, this monumental beast that was in front of us, sort of sideways in obtuse ways, and just trying to figure out, you know, a style of how to even tackle this. Somewhere along the line, Terry came up with this idea of everything should always ask questions, including the music, you know, I mean, which is an interesting one. How can you get music to ask questions constantly? And I sort of took this as sort of our leitmotif, as our dictum throughout the whole thing, that things should never be answered. The question was much more important and much more interesting. And I tried to figure out a way of doing music that, in a way, would always open doors and let you as an audience in. I mean, there's, you know, people always talk about the audience being a participant in a movie, but really taking that to an extreme, whereby the words weren't really the important thing, but the images and the music were just, you know, like an onion, unpeel, and at the same time you had to complete it. None of the tunes are quite as, you know, crossed T's and dotted I's as my tunes normally are. They're always, it's like you get to finish them in your head, or there's a slight vagueness about them, which I felt was part of this idea of asking questions. Terry and I were talking a lot about, you know, the green of the grass and the mud, and I kept thinking about these old Baroque paintings. I mean, I grew up in Germany, and actually Terry is very, you know, he's very knowledgeable of paintings and art and stuff like this. And I kept thinking of these church paintings where you have, you know, humanity sort of in the mud, you know, fighting each other, but you get that one beam of light coming through the cloud. And one of the ambitions, in a way, was, you know, how can we go and show the light? And there was actually a moment where, you know, we'd been struggling forever to go and make any of this work, any of these great ideas, actually putting them into reality. And I sort of had grumpily, after a huge argument with Terry about the meaning of a minor third compared to an open fifth, you know, one of those sort of nonsense arguments we were having, gone away and basically broken every rule, you know, and every musical rule. You're not supposed to go parallel, you're not supposed to follow minor thirds with each other, but I knew it was going to work. I just wrote this piece and I dragged it over to the cutting room. We put it up against the picture, and it was really quite magical because suddenly new light started appearing in John's photography. And I mean, at first I thought it was just me being, you know, the hypersensitive composer, but when Terry saw it too, and we kept pulling people in and going, you know, showing them a little bit of music with images, you know, do you see what's going on here, and then playing it to them without the music. And it really, you know, it really was interesting for the first time, and maybe the only time, I actually really managed to find a sort of symbiosis, a synchronicity between light and sound that really worked, and it really enhanced John's cinematography.
No war can put it out, conquer it.
Minor thirds are sad and melancholic. Perfect fifths are perfect. And I think when you have perfection, there's nowhere else to go. You know, so in other words, you know, on the one hand, Terry was saying we need to ask questions. On the other hand, he was saying, oh, no, we should use the open perfect fifth, which answers every question. You know, it's a perfect, you know, it's perfect, it's mathematically perfect, it's, you know, emotionally very dead. You know, I mean, there are a lot of perfect fifths floating around the movie, but I'm using them very much as a sort of an afterthought, and the minor third is, I do think there's a romanticism or a melancholy to be had out of certain intervals.
Look at
So, you know, I mean, that's, plus I kept hearing the way the waves were hitting the boats. I mean, this actually, I was hearing that before Terry went out to shoot. I mean, one of the things we were talking about is what must it be like to be in this landing craft, and you just hear the water hit the sides and you don't see anything, you don't see what's ahead of you. Or even at night, just, you know, the shape of the waves. It's, yeah. The way I translated it, it was a minor third. The way Terry translated it, it was a fifth. But I think that was part of, you know, look, that was part of the journey. I mean, I don't think he surrounded himself with a lot of people who would easily agree with him. I think part of what he enjoyed was there was conflict, that there were questions asked constantly by everybody, not just him. Terry was very insistent that it should be real Japanese taiko drums, so I asked my friend Johnny Mori, who plays in a band here, you know, and who's Japanese American and is a great taiko player, to come in. And I just remember him coming in, and it must have been just that day when he decided he was going to get a punk mohawk, bleached bright blonde, you know. And I just remember Terry walking in and going, you know, this is my authentic Japanese percussion section here. And we were, you know, Johnny went out into the studio and the screen was up, there's no sound up. And we were playing a little bit of footage and Johnny said to Terry, oh, is this a Buddhist prayer? And he goes, how do you know? And he goes, well, I was just lip reading it. I'm a Buddhist, you know, and that sort of, it was strange, you know, it's like the mohawk and then Johnny started playing. It was really late at night and he just started playing and he started chanting and it was the most sort of magical thing. And I think even Terry was convinced we didn't have to go to Japan for this. The other thing we're hearing is this really small drums. There was this whole sort of fluttery thing, which I wanted to be really precise. This, like just time passing, you know. I know it sounds incredibly pretentious, but in those days I was slightly more pretentious than I am now. I had this idea that there should be this sort of idea of fate, of time just going and being totally non-judgmental. It never gets louder, it never gets quieter, it never gets, you know, whatever. But in its own peculiar way, again, it's that idea that as an audience, it feels quite threatening, even though it's really, really quiet. But it's just always there, and it just sort of, and it takes you on this journey. Terry kept talking about rivers. You know, the music needs to be like a river. It needs to take you somewhere. And I actually thought it was a really great description of what music should do in a movie. I think Terry will agree with me that the curse both Terry and I live under is we're great procrastinators. So the best way to procrastinate is to talk about other people's music and to talk about other things. You know, people who've actually finished writing their pieces. And so some of these pieces definitely found a home in the movie, like the Charles Ives Unanswered Question, the Gustav Fauré, the Requiem, which just worked so beautifully. I could never imagine that scene being any other way. And the big Avo pad chord at the beginning of the movie, which is just, again, it has that unbelievable primeval quality about it, boldness. Terry always had remembered that the way it works is you play the organ and then you switch it off, and so it just dies. And none of the recordings we could find did that, and you know, but he was insistent that that was how it was done. And then finally we found one, and it's the most pathetic noise because it just sort of, you know, it sort of dies in a pathetic way, and it all gets detuned, etc. So. But the actual idea of that chord is fantastic. Loved the Unanswered Question. And I always liked the questions, and I didn't like the answers so much. And Terry said, let's just take the answers out. I don't think they'll ever let us do that, but I think we took the answers out. It's just an amazingly beautiful piece. I mean, it's that, the Fauré. I wasn't, you know, I mean, you know, this isn't about me as a composer. This is about us. You know, it's sort of the brotherhood of filmmakers when you work with Terry, and, you know, whatever works for the film. I was part of that process up to a certain point at which Billy Weber probably quite rightly banned me from the dub stage. I remember even at the premiere, you know, Andy Nelson pacing because, you know, he just wanted to catch me before I walked in because he had exchanged one piece of music for another piece of music. I couldn't tell. But, you know, everybody was very, you know, precious is probably the wrong word, but it's probably the right word, you know, about disturbing the art of it. I sound very flippant about the whole thing, but it was 6 hours of music, and it was hard work, and, you know, I thought it was going to kill me. I remember coming home, clutching my chest and going, I don't think I'm going to see Christmas, and meaning it. I wasn't joking. It's all a nightmare because it's always the blank page, and it's always at the tip of my tongue, but I don't know how to say it, and it's, you know, what if the next note doesn't come, or all that stuff, you know, all the paranoia and neurosis, etc. And at the end of the day, it's not rocket science, you know, but at the same time, we just try to do as well as we can. And Terry kept saying, and I thought that was great, it's a great way of looking at making movies. We have to work like surgeons, you know, when you're in the hospital, and the movie is the patient on the, you know, on the slab being operated on. It's very okay for the nurse to say, "Excuse me, sir, doctor, you're just about to cut the wrong arm off." So there cannot be any ego involved. So all these things were conversations that sometimes got really heated. I mean, Terry once said to me, you know, the way that he and I fight is the way only brothers can fight. You know, and I suppose that's nearly a compliment or not, or whatever, but it describes our situation really well. It was so complicated, especially once we set upon this whole course of getting rid of more and more dialogue. And the thing, you know, I kept feeling the weight of the lack of words on my shoulders, you know, trying to keep the river running. After a while, it just became this sort of minefield of my own neurosis, I suppose.
Somewhere in the South Pacific, a powerful task force of United States Marines begins offensive action to retake the strategic Solomon Islands. Dramatic prelude to one of the most significant battles yet fought in the Japanese theater of war. Troop ships and their escorts plowing through heavy seas to reach the objective on schedule. Rendezvous. Long-range bombers join carrier-based planes as Marines and equipment go over the side in invasion boats for the first attack. Until the exact second set for departure, landing boats circle the rendezvous as ship batteries lay down a withering barrage of flaming steel. The blinker signals "Stand by." Shore installations are aflame from the incessant pounding of the big guns. Coming ashore in waves, they swarm across the beaches and immediately begin to dig in. They find Japanese signs, a hastily abandoned Japanese camp, food still upon the mess tables. The enemy took to the hills in a hurry. An amphibian patrol bomber is first to land upon the enemy airfield, as the United States flag is hoisted above the first territory to be retaken from the Japanese. United States warships engaged the Japanese fleet off the Solomon Islands. The Japanese came from the north. Their main objective, to retake Guadalcanal Island and its strategically important airfield. Long-range United States bombers and carrier-borne fighters race in to refuel, reload, and return to the fight. From Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, United States Admiral Nimitz directs the grand strategy of attack. To Vice Admiral Halsey, aboard the flagship, came word of a huge Jap troop convoy. American warships steamed into action. For 3 days and 3 nights, Halsey pounded the invading fleet with every gun firing. What was left of the Jap fleet staggered north, leaving more than 23 of their vessels at the bottom of the sea. Among them, a battleship, 5 cruisers, and more than 30,000 men. Along the sea lanes from Australia, United Nations convoys pour a steady stream of fresh troops and equipment. Men to man newly won bases as the first step in a general offensive. In personal command on the land front, General MacArthur orders crack divisions of United States mechanized forces into action. Shock troops, flown in by bombers, land on a natural strip discovered in the jungle. Their job, to flank the Japs retreating toward Buna, main enemy stronghold in New Guinea. Relentlessly, Australians press forward from the east, Americans from the west, swiftly and surely closing the prongs of their pincers upon the fleeing Japs. A convoy bringing supplies and ammunition moves up over a crude trail hacked from the steaming jungle by United Nations engineers. American artillery making the wilderness a hell for the invader. Doggedly, efficiently, United States infantrymen track down the Japs. Flamethrowers test their weapons, smoking out the enemy wherever he may be lurking. Through swamps and streams they advance. After months of bitter training, planning, and preparing, American soldiers are on the offensive. Guadalcanal Airport, the tiny patch of land for which Japan has sacrificed a fleet of warships and thousands of fighting men, still bristles with United States bombers. For the forces that control Guadalcanal command the approaches to Australia, hold mastery of the skies over the vitally important Solomon Islands. Today, these land-based bombers are leading the way as the combined United States land, sea, and air offensive begins the task of sweeping the Japs from the South Pacific. armchair commander, Admiral Nimitz comes all the way from Hawaii to decorate Major General Vandergriff, whose fighting Marines captured the airfield from the Japs and held it against all odds. Highest honors are awarded officers and men alike. Majors, captains, privates, they've proven themselves in the test by fire. One youngster has 10 Jap bombers and 19 fighter planes to his credit, one of the outstanding records of the war. These are the men who bore the brunt of the battle. Now, with reinforcements newly arrived, they're ready to push on. Marching single file, long columns of fighting men stream across the island in pursuit of the enemy. Once the little men of Nippon were in complete control here. Now they're on the run. Plunging into malaria-infested jungles, the Marines steadily, doggedly enlarge their hold on the island. At an advanced base, they enjoy their first rest in weeks. They have the advantage of an uninterrupted supply line, and they get nothing but the best. Marines take no chances on being surprised by roving Jap patrols. Any line may be the front line on Guadalcanal, and they dig in as they advance. Machine guns always on the ready. Artillerymen back up the infantry, blasting the Japs from the island. Airfield on Guadalcanal is the most hotly contested strip of land in the South Pacific. New runways, built by American soldiers with captured Japanese equipment, are inspected by the Marine commanders. Air Cobras, fighter planes are constantly on patrol. For 5 months, the Japs have tried to win back this vital outpost. But their transports, bombed and beached, lie wrecked on the sands of the Solomon Islands. General Vandergrift and General Bogle push forward into the jungle, directing the campaign that has killed nearly 7,000 Japs on Guadalcanal alone. The Japs call Guadalcanal Death Island. Supporting the infantry, the Marines' big amphibious tanks bring up supplies over any road, or through no roads at all. Offshore, an American freighter battles an oil fire just as she was preparing to land her cargo. Calmly, the Marines fight the flames. All supplies are saved, and the ship will sail again.
Economic Administration and the Army Service Forces now operate special produce farms to provide fresh vegetables and fruit for American troops on Guadalcanal and nearby islands. Watermelons, a real delicacy, are among the variety of good things which are grown and transported to men in the jungle interior of the Solomons. The produce is packed in strong cases, cushioned to take up the shock of parachute landings. An Army transport plane carries them to distant areas. Out of the plane by parachute, men of the air delivery section drop the containers to isolated batteries on guard far from the coast. To this outpost patrol on the fighting line, watermelon is a welcome gift from the skies. In the first of many Pacific Island groups from which the enemy has now been driven, a brief, happy respite from battle.